Welcome, busy gamers. Today we're going to be talking about Superfuse. What's good, what's bad, and that all-important question, is it worth your time? If you've joined me for another worth your time video in the past, feel free to go ahead and skip straight to the section you're most interested in. If not, let's head right to the overview. Developed by Stitchheads Entertainment and published by Raw Fury, Superfuse entered its early access period on January the 31st of 2023. The game was intended to be a love letter to Diablo 2 with a unique twist. And that shows. You can really tell that Stitchheads care about their game and the genre. Superfuse lets you take the role of an enforcer, a superpowered being created by the gods to enforce their will on the general populace, and, in this scenario, to cleanse and remove beings known as the corruption. The corruption are oddly grotesque horde, reminiscent of zombies, shall we say. The main questline of the game has you working for an emissary of the gods to protect citizens and cleanse the corruption, but it's made clear that the emissary and the gods themselves care very little for the general populace, only their own financial interests. Embarking on your journey in Superfuse has you select one of 3 available classes, and they have plans to add a 4th before the full launch of the game. The current classes are the Berserker, a tanky in-your-face fighter with access to lightning and storm-based abilities, the Elementalists, which is primarily a long-range fighter with access to fire and ice specialties. The Technomancer, a human fused with robotic arms and legs that's kind of reminiscent of Doc Ock from Spider-Man to me. They can either fight at range, creating an area of effect damage with metal shards, or create an army of small constructs to fight for them. Once you've selected your class and started to defeat your first few waves of enemies, the game opens up even further with its namesake fusion system. Fusions are modifications that can be added to each skill that you acquire, changing its passive, on-hit, when defeated, and utility effect. For example, Elementalists can make fireballs that ricochet off walls and split into additional projectiles when they collide with the enemy. Or it could reduce its energy cost, making it easier to use the skill constantly, but with the trade-off being a slight damage reduction. This type of customization means that no 2 characters in the game play the same way, and it allows you to make the super being that fits your playstyle. The same fusions can even be applied multiple times for additional effects, all of which must be placed efficiently into a puzzle like Mosaic or Grid. This additional restriction does mean that you're going to need to plan ahead when placing each fusion to ensure that you squeeze every last ounce of power from your upgrades. At the time of this review, I've played Superfuse for over 20 hours. I've leveled each class approximately to level 15, and I've also completed the game and several solar missions with the Elementalist class. Because this is an early access review, I'll be doing things a little bit differently than usual. I'll also call out some of the items I hope are changed in the bad or negative section, and mention a few changes that have already occurred since I started playing in earlier versions. So what's good about Superfuse? I've played a lot of ARPGs over the years, but the color scheme and comic book aesthetic are unique, and most games in the genre are high fantasy, with dark or elder gods as your primary foe. The art style just fits the game and the combat quite well, and the overall aesthetic has a neon and cyberpunk feel attached to the comic book art, which I like very well. I like that it also doesn't present things quite as black and white as other games in the genre do. As an enforcer, you're helping people in the main story, but your personal reasons are left pretty nebulous, and the reasons for the people that you work for, well, they really aren't taking the moral high ground here, which can result in interesting narrative development and long-term character choice. Some of this does need development throughout the story to really shine, so I hope that buttoning that up a bit is on Stitchhead's list. The fusion system is phenomenal for me, and it's a unique twist on progression. It makes customizing a character rewarding while having a good amount of depth that isn't immediately apparent. Fusions drop regularly, but come with different statistics even for the same fusion, and multiple copies of the same fusion could be applied to a skill, giving you plenty to look for in upgrades. Applying a fusion of any kind improves the skill's overall damage output, as skills that receive fusions also increase in level. However, the amount of additional fusion capacity you gain each level is low, so there's a balance that needs to be struck between your skills, as you won't be able to empower all of them. Fusions are also applied in a grid, which I mentioned earlier, and each fusion creates a puzzle piece with a different shape and makeup that requires you to build off the last fusion or other fusions that you've placed. You can rotate these and place your skills appropriately, and that's going to strongly factor into the late game as you do everything you can to get the most out of a particular skill. The leveling and progression trade-offs from boosting a core stat to unlock new skills versus doubling down on current skills and effects is also really well done from my perspective. It was worked in thematically as well by being represented as a strand of DNA with branches that unlock over time. Each class also feels very unique to me, and to a lesser degree, the subspecialties of each class feel very distinct as well. From my experience, the play patterns and rotations do differ greatly between the classes. Berserkers really wade in and swing about. Elementalists duck in and out, staying just ahead of packs of mobs while firing projectiles into the mass. And Technomancers form kind of a metal meat shield between them and their enemies while sitting back and taking a more voyeuristic approach to combat. Unless they're forced to come in and swing a hammer themselves, which they can do. The only classes that I feel like there is kind of a similarity between are the non-pet build for the Technomancer and the Elementalist, which have some crossover in the way that they move through and clear a map. So what's bad about Superfuse? So first of all, there's going to be a bit of a disclaimer here. Right now, there's quite a few things on this list, but it's early access, and I think it's important to point out the flaws and to monitor them as this game develops. If I think it's something that I think is an unfixable flaw, I'll call that out as well. First things first, let's hit them quick. All classes are gender and model locked. While I don't mind an ARPG that has a base sprite for its male and female counterparts, I do at least believe that each class should have both male and female representation. They're a smaller studio, so I'm not saying we need a large focus on customization, but the bare minimum here hasn't really been met for me. This is an area we should go ahead and talk about variety overall in as well. Right now, there's only about 6 different enemy types and 2 to 3 environment types. What they have is fun and looks great, but it can get repetitive pretty quickly, especially since the in-game solar system and the planets have the exact same enemies and the environments that you face prior to leaving that initial world and completing the story. So let's move on and talk a little bit about pathing. Pathing for me is the biggest issue. Characters currently just move towards the object or location or enemy that is targeted with no real regard for collision, instead of taking the most direct route to the location selected. That means in a battle you can easily get caught on a crate or a change in the flooring and be stopped. Or as a melee character, you can be selecting an enemy you just can't quite reach, and that'll cause you just to swing at empty air. Usually this is easy to notice, but if you're swarmed by enemies, you don't want to miss even a second of damage to clear them away, as that could result in your untimely death and a trip back to the nearest checkpoint. Now, let's address some equipment progression as well. Right now, the way equipment drops feels pretty lackluster, and the progression is just really rare. Most equipment is focused on raw stats, and the level of the gear matters far, far less than its rarity. This is such an issue that at level 22, I was still wearing a level 3 chest piece because I had a legendary and it applied so many more stats compared to its level 22 equivalent epic and rare versions. The shops in the main town are also just very underwhelming. Outside of the first 1 or 2 hours of the game, the available items are not going to be an improvement. They're basically only an improvement if you have nothing already. Because there's really no gold sink in the game right now outside of a vendor that allows you to gamble on acquiring random equipment, that also feels kind of lackluster. And at this time, my primary character is sitting at well over 500,000 credits. I think this follows up nicely from our equipment discussion, so let's go ahead and address inventory management. Right now, inventory management's difficult, with a core mechanic being the use and spam of boosters to heal, augment, and regenerate your energy. This requires you to keep multiple stacks of booster charges along with town portals, and those things just drop constantly. They're not automatically picked up, and they really clutter the map and your equipment. Equipment itself is large, and it would be ideal for the game to separate out quest items and boosters, etc. from the main inventory, giving maybe a max stack of 100 or something, and just having it automatically be picked up if you needed some. Overall clarity still needs work as well. While they've been focusing on improving the tooltips throughout the game, it still has a long way to go for me, especially regarding how the modifiers in the game work and what they actually calculate their increases from. I had to do a lot of trial and error when playing to identify what and how something was going to be affecting my overall defense or damage output. Pacing also struggles just a bit regarding levels. Currently, once you hit levels 8 to 10, the overall leveling experience slows down drastically. You end the story anywhere in between level 19 and level 22, and that leaves the last half of the game feeling pretty slow. Once a level is gained, it also just doesn't feel that impactful. For example, being in a level 22 area as a level 18 or 19 didn't really feel that much different than being in that area when I was level appropriate. At level 22, you're still likely also going to have a huge portion of your skills and your traits locked, so what I would like to see is the leveling speed increased and paired better throughout the story, with you ending with a more fully fledged build. So what I mean here is more that your campaign should actually take you from level 1 to 35, for example. That would give me a much more complete build, but I'm not saying we really add anything into that. We just increase the leveling speed, we increase the difficulty of some of those things as we go. To end, there are also just several miscellaneous bugs to squash and kill before full release. This one I don't really want to harp on, but there are things like quest givers having exclamation points over their heads even when they're not actually giving quests. There's some stuttering and some map fall through when you're teleporting in or out of a map, and some other similar issues. I think these are all things that they're relatively aware of and that they're working to fix, and so this I really don't actually see as being an issue since it's early access. Let's move on to our channel focus. How does Superfuse treat your time? This one has both good and bad in the area. It's really easy to hop in and out of a map, portaling back to town. None of your general character advancement is tied to something you can't just drop or save on the fly. And in addition, the late game solar missions are pretty short, similar to Diablo 3's bounty system, and they work well for having a bite-sized piece of content to drop in and out of. That being said, with area and level design being extraordinarily large, and teleport pad unlocks being rare or far apart, you can get bogged down in the story where you won't yet have unlocked a new checkpoint for long periods of time. Therefore, when you leave the game, you lose the exploration you've done during that period if you need to leave. This could be improved, but it's definitely an issue for timeliness today. Let's move on to the final scores. For now, I'm actually going to go ahead and give this game a 6.5 overall. Superfuse is a game with a huge amount of potential. It's just not quite reached it yet, but it's one I plan to follow closely as its early access progresses. The developers have shown they're listening to feedback and making constant changes in good faith with the community. Right now, it's too slow and too slim on content, but the bones have set up a strong and compelling foundation. It's one I hope I'm putting a higher score out for on full release. I'm going to give this an ephemeral efficiency score of 6. Similar to the overall score, this is an area they haven't really focused on yet, but the core ideas for a good game to jump in and out of with ease, allowing you to progress but not be tied down, they're also there. So I have a lot of high positive horizons for this game. We just have to see where they take it. That concludes my review of Early Access Superfuse for today. If you enjoyed this content, please leave me a like, consider subscribing, or give me a comment if you have questions, concerns, or feedback. I really hope you enjoyed this content, and people who make it to the end of this video are really people who are helping me grow and develop. So thank you very much, and until next time, enjoy gaming.